Good evening and welcome to Top Talk on Kaftan Television. I am Olamide Alhassan. And our Nigeria's insecurity challenge is often framed in terms of weapons, military deployments, and emergency responses. But beneath the violence lies deeper issues of identity, mistrust, misinformation, competition over resources, and the exclusion of young people from peace processes. In Plateau and Kaduna states, cycles of communal conflicts have persisted for decades despite heavy security presence. Tonight, we ask a fundamental question. Can peace be built without guns? And what role should young people play in stabilizing fragile communities? My guest tonight is Richard Ali, a lawyer, author, and executive director of Delimi Prosper Project SRD, a youth-focused peace-building initiative working in Plateau State and Kaduna State. Stay with us. Good evening and welcome to Top Talk, Richard Ali. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
So, I read through your profile and I'm pretty much curious about your journey. Author, lawyer, and then now security experts. And looking into the Delimi project, how did you get here? Like, most people run away from security issues. And there you go, embracing it. What's the secret? How did you get here?
I think it was an inevitable, a slow evolution, but it became inevitable, particularly in my first year as a law student. Jos is my hometown, and that year, I'd just gotten into Zaria early that year. And I came back home early in September, and that was just when the crisis started. So I had this unusual situation where you just came on, you're just this young 100-level law student. You come home for the holidays, and then this crisis happens on September 9th, 8th, 9th, thereabouts. And we had this curious situation where at some point we had to actually leave where we have to move from where we stayed and find refuge at a mobile police barracks. Wow. We were actually at that police barracks when the September 11th attack happened. So it was that context of, I was on a certain trajectory of course, law, was interested in writing, but suddenly there was that rupture where you have security issues, particularly whether they are global security, whether they are internal security issues forced upon you. So that sort of the tangent towards security issues for me. And inevitably, I finished my law studies. I did some work with the National Association of Nigerian Students, eventually, and here we are.
And picking interests particularly beyond just Plateau State, I know part of your interest areas are Kaduna State, and these are places that we know that we've had lots of conflicts, communal clashes, but from the works you've been doing on ground, what category of issues would you say is emanating from these places, especially these two places that has been your focus so far on your project?
So the threat profiles of Plateau and Kaduna are fairly distinct, but they are also closely interrelated. They are both internal security crises. Let's maybe start with Plateau State. Plateau State is a more classic farmer-header resource-based conflict where it's about competing groups around resources that both groups believe are limited. Of course, it's attenuated by things such as religion, such as traditional hostilities, but the threat profile on the plateau is essentially one about resource-based conflict, land, water access, and then, of course, the ethno-religious coloration that has entered it. Now, in Kaduna State, it's a slightly different conflict, particularly recently with the iteration of banditry, which has come in. Kaduna is one of those states that has quite a lot of land mass, and some of these are forest reserves. And in the nature of the Nigerian Federation and the way that our subnational units have been organized, you have a lot of ungoverned spaces or poorly governed spaces particularly. So the distinct threat profile of Kaduna, which is in northwestern Nigeria, is more of one of criminal banditry, which has exacerbated, into a full-blown security crisis in that sense. Kaduna also has a slightly more hybrid threat profile in the sense that there was also historically ethno-religious tensions from the 1988 to 1992, the Miss World riots. So there was always that. But currently, perhaps the most significant threat is this of rural banditry and the lack of security of a lot of spaces. In Plateau State, when we come back to Plateau State, it's a more complex society. And with this competing, there are 53 ethnic groups in Plateau State. And at every level, this competition over what these groups imagine to be scarce natural resources has led to incidents of conflict. Unfortunately, often than not, other reasons, political, religious, ethnic, have come to further complicate it. So this would be my assessment of the two very different but related threat profiles.
No, I'm looking at Plateau State now. You know, I used to feel like, you know, we're not on ground there, so we have not done this kind of assessment that you have done. But maybe someone looking at it from the surface may feel like if it's communal clash, if it's something related to ethnicity, maybe if it was properly managed, maybe that should not have, you know, grown into a full-blown threat, that maybe religion begins to come in and begins to steal the order of the day. Yeah. What do you make of that? Maybe poor management could have been a problem?
Yes, I mean, that's at the center of most crises. You know, it's about the mismanagement of the crisis. If we say, for example, we typify a resource-based conflict, often than not, both sides or all the sides assume that that resource is scarce. But where, for example, we're coming from in the Delimi Prosper project is that often than not, that is not the real case. That it's not that these resources are scarce. When you drive from here to Kaduna, you drive from here to Jos, you find so much land there. You find so much river. You find so much resources. So often than not, it's a limited portion of these available resources that are being competed against. Therefore, if you step back, it's a question of the mismanagement of natural resources as a major factor in these conflicts. Now, it's also the same thing when misunderstandings happen between communities. Often than not, there are traditional redress mechanisms. Sometimes these are located in traditional authorities, and these try to address these issues such that it does not escalate. And there are methods of redress, there are methods of restoring that social balance. And this is what is ideally meant to happen. Now, if it is not contained at that level, then it goes into the judicial system, often than not, where somebody takes someone to court, a determination is made, and this solves the issue. If that doesn't work, then that means it requires a political solution, where the political elite from these places will come and iron their differences and try to get to the bottom of it. Now, what has happened over the last 10, 15, in fact, perhaps in the run-up to democracy, has been the erosion of these principles of balance, whether it's in the sense of the traditional society and what it is that their role is. Every few years, what's the role of the traditional authority? Often than not, the traditional authority are essentially clerks under the Ministry of Local Government, and their role is to receive Toyota Land Cruisers but they don't actually have any role beyond the ceremonial, really. So those traditional redress mechanisms are not operating as they should. Now, if it escalates from there and it gets to the judicial aspect of it now, then we look at the problems of administration of justice, which is one, of course, the cost of administration of justice, and in terms of the shared amount of time. So when you have people who are certain that if they go to court over the next 10, 15 years, this matter would not be determined, then they feel, why should we do this? Now, when you push forward and you talk of political solutions, often than not, what you see is that there's an incentive at the political level to exacerbate conflict rather than dealing with it, because that's what gives access to the center. So when you look at all of this, this is the lockstep into which we have fallen, where the very systems that ought to have addressed these conflicts at their embryonic state, that should even provide early warning for conflicts. You can study the patterns. Those very systems are often than not the very, very systems that have failed. And that's why we're where we are.
You know, it's quite heartbreaking.
Absolutely.
When you see some of these news when you see some of this, when you hear the stories? Because you would never be able to imagine it until you probably experience it. You can only imagine it. But so looking at some of these conflicts here and there, the threats, looking at Kaduna State, in fact, as recent as what happened in Kaima, there were stories of of intelligence ahead of time.
Yeah.
But half the time, these things still happen anyway.
Yeah.
So would this be a problem of maybe the traditional rulers not really having the necessary willpower to do anything to start with, and maybe the political power as well for maybe the government to have done something about it? Or then could it also be the problem with our security operatives?
So in my line of work, there's this idea of a wicked problem. You know, so a wicked problem is like an onion, or it's like a woman who is carrying a baby who is pregnant and the baby is pregnant, something that is multi-layered. You know, if you cut this one, there's another layer inside it. So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. It's a mix of all of these things. And I'm going to perhaps take the 2 or 3 of the main ones that you have said. The traditional political authority have very, very little role to play beyond interfacing with state officials and that ceremonial role. Traditionally, you have some sort of intelligence gathering, but the traditional rulers themselves have no constitutional role. They are often than not, as I just said, clerks in a government department who serve ceremonial functions. So they are there. Now, when we talk about the policing aspect of it, all right, Nigeria is perhaps one of the least policed places in terms of the ratio of police to the actual people on the ground. And even with this distortion, even when you look at the total number of police that you have vis-a-vis the population, then you have to remove the number of police that are essentially carrying out VIP operations, VIP protection operations. Meaning that even in terms of the basic policing, having that DPO, having that police post and all of that, vast areas of Nigeria simply do not have the presence of adequate policing to be able to serve as an intelligence gathering, civil facing sort of expansion of the Nigerian state. So you've got that. Now, the other thing is about the issue of the political will. Now, when you have a federation where often than not access to the center, particularly since 1999, everybody's focused on the center, whether that center is Abuja, or whether that center is a state capital, or whether that center is a local government headquarters. The interest is to get to the center and to get as much of that pie as possible. So if you have a situation where everything is smooth, everything is calm, then what justifies getting a larger access to that slice of security votes, of development, financing? What justifies it? So you have an interesting thing where, to a large extent, political actors themselves have not always played fairly in this crisis management as well, you know, and their actions sometimes when, for example, you have a resource-based conflict, but instead you say because it's convenient that it's an ethno-religious crisis or it's some traditional boundary issue. Meanwhile, it's just about the lack of access. When you look at governance as a whole, there are basic things that governance ought to do. When you have good governance, you have education is taken care of, healthcare is taken care of. You do these things in order to give the citizen something in the state that belongs to them, something that they can lose. Yes, a sense of belonging. You're not doing the free healthcare, not free healthcare. You're not providing quality healthcare, good roads, employment, just because you're providing it. You're providing it such that people would have a stake in the state. Over the last 40, 50 years, we have seen the state withdraw from multiple aspects of people's lives, whether it's in the provision of quality education, in the provision of water and sanitation and health services, even in the provision of security, which is what has brought us here. So we have seen a wholesale withdrawal of the state from the lives of people. And what has happened in this case is that people are now providing their own water and security, water and sanitation and health services. They are now providing their own security. And in this space in which the state has withdrawn, non-state actors are also coming in, sensing a vacuum, and establishing themselves in ways that are actually inimical to the development of society and the continuation of the state itself. So this is a wicked problem. It's a problem that defies a single interpretation and also defies a single solution. What we should be looking at is an all-of-society approach to this, all-of-government approach to this, and bring everything and try to unstrand it. But the more time we do not do this, the more complex the wicked problem becomes.
Wicked problem indeed. You know, when you said we need to look at an all-society solution, I'm not looking at an all-government solution. I'm concentrating now on all-society solution. Now, looking at Delimi projects you brought about, focusing on youth.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know why the youth? Is it because maybe most of them are victims and most of them are majorly the actors and the drivers?
Yeah.
Help us understand that.
Yeah, young people in the Sahel as a whole are the primary perpetrators and the primary victims of violence in the Sahel. And in our own part of the Sahel, in fact, in most of Africa, we have this reality of the youth bulge, where you have the youth population is up to 60%, 65%. So these are young people who are at the prime of their lives, who are very, very energetic, who can easily be arrayed around one cause for or against. And you push it a bit further, it's a breakdown of the peace, it's the breakdown of and people are fighting. So if we're going to solve the internal security crisis or the regional security crisis of Nigeria and the larger Sahel, then young people have to be put at the center. What we have done at the Delimi Prosper project, which has been undertaken with support from the FCDO, particularly from the Spring project, what we are doing there is to emphasize two things: youth-centered solution and one that is grounded on the environment, particularly the natural environment in the sense of the ways that natural resources are managed and mismanaged. We feel that this is a part of the conflict that people do not often factor in when they are speaking about this crisis.
Most of the time.
Yes. But here's the thing: if the land itself and if the river, and the rivers and the rain and if all these were better managed, it would directly create employment. It would directly lead to an increase of taxation. The taxation would pay for better education, would pay for better social services. But at the center of it, we have allowed these natural resources, almost 1 million square kilometers, that's the size of this country, and we just let it be. There's no management, there's no proactive management. And so it's a major feeder of this conflict because young people don't have a lot to do. Some of them don't feel hopeful about the country. You've got the jackpotting going on and everybody wants to leave. Everybody is either desperate or performing desperation to get out of the country. And those who stay have nothing positive to say. They're just marking time. So it's a time bomb. It's a ticking time bomb. And if we do not harness two things, if we do not harness the positive value and capacity of our young people, and if we do not harness our natural resources in ways that are future thinking, in ways that create an ecological balance while solving economic realities and economic problems, such as addressing unemployment, increasing GDP, then this thing is going to explode on all of us. And we're already seeing the many ways that the country is overheating, whether it's incidents like Kayama, whether it's the negotiations with bandits, whether it is armed robberies. These are all the symptoms of a polity that is overheating. And I don't know how long it's going to stay. So when we look at this from that perspective, then we as an NGO, Engaging Borders, that's the name of our NGO, we believe that our way is to engage these borders and try to de-escalate you know, try to de-escalate these things in our own little way. And at the center of this for us is young people. Young people are not just the future, they are the present, and that future is also theirs, but we have to work with them here.
You know, talking about working with them here and now, especially looking at the environmental factor you mentioned, and you gave an example. You said we have over 1 million hectares of land not being in use. Do you think that it's a problem that has eaten deep into us? Because I feel like in most families now, you don't even find situations where parents ask their kids literally, what do you want to be? And then the next thing is, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a doctor. Nobody ever says, I want to till the ground to make some money. It's hard to find people say, oh, I want to go into agriculture, maybe because it's not even advertised as something big. It's not even such a big deal. Away from the fact that security is also a major concern, because most persons that I've even seen who have attempted, you know, to go into farming, the case is always, oh, some herders destroyed my farm yesterday. This happened to my farm. I've seen, I met a particular young man who invested so much in some, you know, hectares of lands, and he didn't get anything out of it. He lost the entire fund just because some herders entered his farm and everything got destroyed. You know, that's a different ballgame. But we're talking about the fact that half the time people want to make smart money. In fact, you hear people talk about the country, we're now in a digital age, so you have to be smart about the things you do. So talking about agriculture is probably the last thing on most people's minds. So how do you begin to change people's minds or change the perspective of how they see things? I'm still looking at it from the broader perspective of, as a community, we need to do something.
So I'm going to say several things about agriculture, but the first one is, you can't, with the youth bulge that we have now, you can't be farming like you were doing in the 1850s. We can't have the labor-intensive farming of carry a hoe, that operation feed the nation. No, we can't have that. It does not make sense. The young people won't do it. So we're talking about the things that other people have done elsewhere. We're talking about mechanization. We're talking about easy access to mechanization. We're talking about actually that government policies surrounding agriculture in this country should leave just statements and slogans and actually filter. That the fertilizer that is provided should get to the person who wants to farm. That tractor, that combine harvester should be available where it is that it is needed. That the data that, and what this is one of the saddest things in my experience in this country, is that the government of Nigeria creates some of the most amazing holistic data relevant to agriculture. But the one person who needs that data, the farmer, is the one person who has no access to that data. We have meteorological data. We have the Agric Research Institutes, whether it's MVRI, NIFOR, CREAN. We have all these places that are doing amazing work. But the one person who needs it, the farmer, has no access to any of this. So if we're going to talk about farming in the 21st century, particularly now, and we want to be able to interest young people in all of this, then we need to stop thinking of it in terms of somebody going to hoe on a farm. Secondly, we need to stop thinking of agriculture in terms simply of farming proper. It's an entire value chain. When we talk about the possibilities of creating jobs, we're not just talking about the farmers themselves. We're talking about the people who would set up canning factories of 1,000 workers there. We're talking about the person whose job is to move the skin and turn it into leather. We're talking about the person who's going to say, okay, mine is
the
tea.
Processing, of course.
Mine is tea. I'm going to process the tea, or I'm going to process the coffee and export it. So it's an entire value chain. And often than not, when we speak about agriculture, we just think of it in terms of farming. So when you step back from it, you see that it's, of course, it's a failure of government initiatives over the years, which for various short-term reasons have failed. It's also a problem of a lack of adequate information and communication flowing through the system. Because in my experience, you have all the data, you have all the wonderful expertise, but the people who need access to that expertise are often the ones that do not have access. So you have silos where information exists and it's accumulating but doesn't come out. Then, of course, you have the question of a lack of imagination on the part of the average Nigerian. You can blame the average Nigerian for this or you cannot, but it's closely related to the poor quality of public education that they get. If the quality of education that you are getting is not opening your mind or your child's mind to think creatively, to solve the problems of their own society, then the education is defective, but you are also living in that society. If you didn't get it in school, surely can't you observe? So you have this interesting lockstep, you know, and I always come back to the wicked problem analysis, you know, where one thing feeds into another, one thing feeds into another, and then it becomes this chaos, you know, of things, you know. So, and this is where we are. I'm a firm believer in agriculture. Often and when you look at the returns, at almost every point in value creation in any agricultural value chain, you are talking 30% increase in value, 40%. A hectare of land in Taraba is probably 200, 300,000 naira if you are going to buy it. Now, if you planted oil palm there, you planted oil palm there, yes. Suddenly, in 3 years' time, on that same piece of land, you're getting ₦1 million from the oil palm itself.
People would say, would I be safe to go that far when I want to farm? But let's go on a quick break. We'll return, the conversation continues.
Okay.
Viewers, stay with us. Welcome back. We're still on to Top Talk, and we're still in the studio with Richard Ali, helping us understand most of this communal conflicts and internal crisis that happens in places like Plateau and Kaduna states. You made a reference to maybe an example of having farmlands in places like Taraba, and it begs to question, how safe are we, even if we were to decide to, you know, farm in places like that, or maybe those who live there farm there. But the question is, how safe are those who even live at home to farm at home?
Yeah, so security is a major challenge, you know, and it's gotten worse. We can all see it, you know. It's gotten worse, not just in Nigeria, but in the larger Sahel and even globally. You know, we've had the state increasingly coming under contestation from various non-state actors, whether they're terror groups, criminal organizations, drug trafficking cartels. So the basic sense of security has been one that has been challenged greatly over the last decades. And when you come down to Nigeria, our own internal security crises are even worse. When you couple it against with the poor quality of policing, the lack of good governance and all those issues. So we can argue that security is a main issue when we think about the harnessing of natural resources for agriculture, large-scale agriculture, and the benefits of it. But we're forgetting that, for what it's worth, we're in a democracy. And every 4 years, the Nigerian people have the opportunity to vote in a government. Every 4 years.
Of course.
And it's their job, when they vote in a government, to ensure that those government officials that they have put in, whether they are political appointees or civil servants or whoever, to uphold what the mandate that they were given. So a situation where over the last 20, 30 years, we've continued to vote in people who we have failed to hold accountable is a problem that is different from the security itself. It's what exacerbates the insecurity itself. So we have to stop back and come back to that civic aspect, which is, if you've elected a politician and there's a lot of insecurity, maybe you should start recalling your House of Reps member. Maybe you should recall the senator. Perhaps by the time half of the Senate has been recalled, perhaps they would realize that there's a legislative imperative to hold in the executive accountable. perhaps if executive officials, whether they are governors or presidents or local government chairmen, perhaps when they lose their mandate and don't get re-elected, then they would realize that there are certain things that they too have to do. So it's a social contract. The people have a role to play, their leaders, the elite, the government, everybody has a role to play. But it's also important that when we speak in the context of insecurity, we also hold each other accountable on the basis of our capacity, mandates, and
for a moment, I thought about the fact that when you said we need to, maybe when we start recalling some of our political leaders, maybe things will change. But now I'm wondering, half the time, youth are heavily distracted, because I'm wondering who are those who's going to call them to order, who's going to hold them to account. It's more like youth are heavily distracted. There's always a huge distraction on the surface of things while other things go on beneath. So looking at youth as peace builders now, the future of today, the today and the future of tomorrow. So what do you think, could have been different? I mean, Engaging Borders has a message, right? There's a reason why you decided that youth will be the focus. What do you think could be done differently so that youth begin to position themselves as the true peace builders that they are, not just as victims, but the ones who's going to make the change happen?
Yeah, so to answer your question, often than not, I like to use the phrase often than not because, well, often than not. Interventions around young people are often framed for them, and it does not fit them. So the very first step is to work with young people themselves to frame these interventions, and then you build it in an organic way. Young people in Nigeria do not feel carried along. So they are not being distracted because they don't have the attention span to focus on the things that matter. No, it's because they feel that they were not consulted, they don't have the buy-in of young people. So when you talk about policies at the local level, local government level, state level, you have to build it with young people. They should be in the room there, Now, at the Engaging Borders project, particularly with the Delimi Prosper project, that's exactly what we did. Before we even started, we came out with a Google form which we allowed people to fill in order to get 60 seats on an online course. Now, for those 60 seats, we had well over 800 young people who filled these forms. So it became a difficult thing to select out of 60 and pick the 60 people that we needed. Then we designed, working with young people as well, an online course on the environment and conflict, preventing and countering extremism in your local, and documenting socio-environmental advocacy. Each of them had 8 courses under it. Now, these young people that we've selected, that we've engaged, they went through this course. And then they themselves became a community of practice. And we said, what do you want to do in your communities? And we let them. All we did was to support them. But the ideas were theirs, and they continue to implement these ideas. And from a project management perspective, this has been an extremely successful project, particularly in the terms of the ownership that young people have taken of this project. Sometimes I go online, I see something, it's one of our people, and I'm like, I had no idea, and I'm pleasantly surprised. So in dealing with young people, we have to think differently. We can't be tokenist, let's have that youth person. Where's that youth representative? No. They are 60% of the population. You have to build with them. Their buy-in is not something to be taken for granted. And if we do that, similar to what we've done in the Delimi Prosper project, all across society, I think we would have less of that destruction, and we will have more of that engagement, full ownership by young people, which is crucial to the success of these interventions.
You said something particularly of interest to me. You said half the time youth are not carried along. But it's a case of, we know what the country is like. If you really want to get something done, you have to do it yourself. So if you're waiting to be carried along, don't you think it's going to be a long ride? Because if you do not, for example, I'll give you an example. If you saw a problem in your community and you decided from your experience, the September 11th experience you had, if you didn't take a step, best believe Engaging Brothers will probably not be here. The Limit Project will probably not be here. Which means that we must all take responsibility. Instead of waiting to be carried along, shouldn't we, decide to take major steps, to make a difference?
No, absolutely. When I talk about young people not being carried along, it's not to give young people a free pass. This world that you live in, this country that you live in, this community that you live in, you're the one living there. So if you see something wrong, say something. Exactly. If there's something to do, act. If it is as simple as taking your mobile phone, your iPhone, and making a documentary about the rubbish that is being piled up or the gutter that is being clogged or whatever communal issue, do something. Well, I find that young people increasingly are doing this. One of the aspects about this, which is unexpected to me, has been in environmental stewardship, particularly in Plateau State. I've seen a noticeable shift where young people now care about the environment in the sense of, the way they climate change, the effects of climate change. There has been a whole shift, and this has been entirely organic. So young people are doing these things, and they have the responsibility to do these things. But a perfect situation would be when young people on their end are being activists, they are organizing themselves, and on the part of the state, there's also an open arm, and then they both meet in synergy. Because the reality is that what an individual activist or a group of young people can do, when it meets with the administrative capacities and reach of the state, then that's when system level change happens. Because the state, by its very constitution, has access to resources, has access to information, has access to data that a group of young people, no matter how well-intentioned, simply do not have. So I guess it's a balance here. On the one hand, the state and its institutions should carry young people along, but young people also should not keep quiet. They should go out there, demonstrate, organize, make themselves heard. And then we work towards having that center that is bi-directional and where conversations and change can happen.
I love that. And you talked about the engagements you had with some youth, maybe the advocacy you had with them and all of that, and you specifically said it has been successful. What would you say, or how would you measure that success metrics so we have an understanding of how successful that has been? Like, has it helped in de-escalating conflicts in some of these regions that you've been working across?
Yes, what we have seen particularly is the ideas that we have shared in the course of the Delimi project. We've seen them being mainstreamed in audiences that we would not even have access to. Because these young people have their own audiences. You're having young people creating documentaries by themselves on things that they feel are a big deal based on their participation in our training and in our this thing. We have a website called we have a network. They now have a network called the Voices of Resilience Network, where they are creating content about this, creating content on social media, having their own follow-up meetings with their friends. And so we're seeing this effect, this ripple effect based on what it is that we've done. So sometimes you're just sitting, just like I said, you're sitting on the internet, you're on LinkedIn, and something pops up and, oh, you see the Delimi Prosper hashtag, you're like, oh, this is one of our people. And you're like, okay, you're pleasantly surprised because it means that the effort that we have put in this project, we're seeing that effort have an impact that is likely to continue even at the end of our project. So it's no longer just, oh, so long as there's funding, we're pushing it in, no, So for me, that has been it, In terms of the future of the Delimi project, one of the things that I would like to add in terms of the content would be on the management of communal disputes themselves. Alternative dispute resolution, would like to have more models on alternative dispute resolution. community sensitivity messaging. So would love to have that in addition to the courses that I have said, and would love to have these young people take these courses and go out with it. There's more young people. I'm already in my 40s. There are more people in their 20s, 15, 19, than there are of me. 20 years time, I'll probably be in my own terminal decline, and they would still be at the height of their youth. So if we're able to engage them with the right knowledge, if we're able to get them to take the ownership of this knowledge and disseminate it, not in the way that we've given it, but in their own words, in their own ways, to their own platforms, then we would have a possibility of things changing at the systemic level.
Now, another thing I'm curious about is misinformation. We know how powerful information is. Do you have anything on countering misinformation? So there's an understanding, because half the time, the reason why there's a spark here or a spark there is because the wrong information has been shared. How are you managing that?
Yeah, so part of one of our courses was taken by a friend of ours, a journalist, Nabila Osman. She took that course particularly on hate speech, misinformation and disinformation, which are very, very serious issues now, particularly with the rise of social media. The internet has given us the benefit of social media, but that social media also fuels certain problems regarding to the profusion of hate speech, misinformation, outright disinformation, where the person who is putting it out there knows that it's wrong and pushes it out there, and misinformation. So in that course, Nabila was kind enough to walk our students through, to walk our participants, the young change makers, through how to identify misinformation and disinformation. Platforms for cross-checking news before you share. The whole, taken as shared, copied. We've tried to discourage that by providing fact-checking websites and services. Yes. So at least I can say that for the purpose of our small group of people who we have worked with, they've been thoroughly prepared to be able to pause before sharing, such that they are not the ones adding fuel to the fire. Now, ours is a small project. It's a very small project, and other people are working on other aspects of this. But because of the realities that we have, it's no longer just about misinformation, disinformation. Now you have the rise of AI deepfakes. And the effect of these deepfakes has been really, really terrible in terms of people not even being able to trust verified news sources because a little tweak has been done here, So there is need for more investment, and not just at the non-profit, non-governmental level, but at the level of the government itself. I wouldn't mind if my young daughter, who is in primary school, they should already be teaching her about disinformation and misinformation and hate speech. I would love for that to happen, such that before she even gets to secondary school, she already has an idea how to protect herself and how to correctly identify the information that is being brought to her. So this is me admitting it and agreeing with you entirely that disinformation, hate speech, and misinformation are some of the most debilitating challenges of the world that we live in currently, and that more work needs to be done on this, particularly working with young people. And maybe the last thing I'll add is the younger the better. The younger the better. It ought to start as early as primary school.
Oh, I like that. I really do hope that can actually happen. Your project actually looks at tools like storytelling and digital advocacy, to try to de-escalate some of these conflicts. But how's that been so far? I see you've been putting your efforts into some short stories, podcasts. What's going on there?
So in the earlier project, which was done with the support of the Open Societies initiative, we created 3 short films, and then we had 30 short stories that were created by young people from Nigeria, Mali, Chad, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, and Kenya. That was the original project. Now, in this current project, what we've emphasized is the Peace Public Square events, which was held by the young people. They designed the events and they held these events. And currently, we're working on 2 documentaries, 2 very powerful documentaries. One of the documentaries is about a divided community in Jos Plateau State, you know, where all that divides these 2 communities is a rail line. And on the one side, one group lives, on the other side, one group lives, but they share the same markets. They share the same train station. So that's what one of those documentaries is about. The second documentary idea, which also came from these young people, this story came from the young people themselves. We did not come up with it for them. Was about a young girl in somewhere called Doroa who fixes solar lamps. She sells solar lamps. She fixes them, you know. And it was such a powerful story of youth resilience, of somebody who is female, who is young, and then renewable energy. So it was just such a powerful story. And this also came from the community. Now, these same things that we're seeing, we had about 12 different story ideas of things that they felt strongly about. And we're going to continue to encourage these young people. We may not make it in the course of the project, but they can go ahead and make these films, and we'll continue to support them. We expect to hold executive roundtables down the line, where all that we have learned from young people over the last 8 months would be presented to high-level state officials to get their own take on this. We're already doing some good work with the Kaduna State government. The Kaduna State government is pushing the Kaduna Peace model, you know, non-kinetic and kinetic ways to deal with internal security. We already have a good relationship there, and the relationship in Plateau is also evolving very, very positively. So we'll be in a position where these things that we have learned, because the Delimi project is a learning and adaptation project, would be able to present this and then have a report at the end of it. So this thing that we have done has centered young people, but it's not just young people. It's about getting this whole conversation going on in a way that is measurable, in a way that is also actionable, and in a way that is that's good for society, no matter how you do it, even without our funding, when we move on to something else.
You know, I'm impressed to see how far you've gone and the things you still look forward to doing, especially working with state actors, like even the Kaduna State government. But people tend to say things like, it's easier to, you know, implement things. It's easier to bring out new policies, but implementation is always the problem. How do you intend to do those follow-ups? Because it's always a major issue in the country. Lots of beautiful policies. Talking about implementation, it's almost like they never kickstart. Policies that are not implemented, often than not, are poorly designed. Because in the policy articulation process, it starts with that community feedback for the community or the group or the society completely who you intend to implement that policy. You have to get the feedback from them. You have to get the right stakeholders in the room who will provide that on-the-ground feedback, and then based on what it is that the government has done, for example, or the organization has done before, take that feedback, modify it. And you have to be able to allow the policy feedback loop. Even when it is implemented, it still goes back to those people. What are the challenges? Is there anything? And then you modify. But if that baseline is not done, if the policy is not rooted in the community or the society in which it is operating, then implementation becomes a problem, because those people don't have an ownership of this policy and don't have a desire for the outcome of this policy either. But when you have a policy that everybody wants to see that end project, for example, if you say national identity scheme, for example, and people want that end so that they would be able to get access to healthcare, they understand that that national identity scheme is what gives them access to healthcare, or that's what's going to give them access to resources. That once they understand that,
in Hausa, in Yoruba, in Igbo, in every language, in Pidgin, then you see that they would take it very, very seriously, because they can see that that's the end of that policy. But when a policy just, oh, this is the policy we're going to take, and then there's no buyback, then you have that problem. So if we step back towards what we're doing, yes, implementation has been challenging in Nigeria, but what we try to do with our friends in the state governments particularly is to continue to engage. I'm always talking to them. Whenever there's a new commissioner or there's a new official, we go and visit them and tell them this is what it is that we have done so far. We'll send them direct to DHL, so the man gets it himself. So he gets those policy briefs. We're not sending it so that it winds up in the dust. Mr. DG will get it there, and he will open it, and he'll see it that it's there. So we are not relenting in our own engagement, you know, but we're only playing a little part. The reality is policies that are workable need to be rooted and owned by the communities in which they are being implemented in. All
right, so are you planning to, in rounding up now, are you planning to extend this beyond just Plateau states and Kaduna states? Are you going to be visiting other states, maybe like Taraba, other states with clashes like this, internal crisis?
Yeah, so the Dilimi Prosper project is meant to be a learning and adaptation project. And ideally, I would like to have as much information from as many places as possible. In the research that we're doing, we're already noticing differences between Kaduna and Plateau states, and that's why I can speak of the distinct threat profiles. So would love to also involve Nasarawa State, Taraba State, Katsina State, places that also have distinct threat profiles, in order to make our learning even richer. So we'll continue to engage with our current funders, the Spring Initiative of the FCDO, with other funders we've had in the past, like the Open Societies Foundation, Makota, Ford, and whatnot. Would try to continue to engage to see where we can do this. What we have tried to do is to have a sort of value for money framework, such that we are not going to continue being funded forever and ever. We try to design our initiatives such that it will run itself. When these young people, they can always come back to that open online course. They can always take it long after the project is over. So this is what we've tried to do. So we'd love to see a situation where we work in Taraba State, in Borno State, and elsewhere. But for now, our states of interest is Kaduna and Plateau, because they typify the threat profile of northwestern Nigeria and north central Nigeria.
Thank you so much. It's been so insightful speaking with you.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm sure our viewers have learned a thing or two. All right, viewers, thank you so much for being a part of the show. I am Olamide Alhassan. I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.